Welcome to this Full FX webinar in association with Mosaic Smart Data, AI and machine learning adoption in the foreign exchange market. I'm Colin Lambert, so I'm sort of publisher of the Full FX. With me, and I would go from left to right normally, but I'm not sure how everyone's seeing them on the screen, but we have Stefan Alex, who is Head of Global Customer Marketing at MUFG. Matt Hodgson, who is founder and CEO of Mosaic Smart Data, John Estrada, who is head of e-trading at Credit Suisse, Professor Ramakant, who is the chair of mathematical finance at the University of Oxford, and Stefan Maurer, who is head of market structure and innovation at ING. Is it Financial Markets? I think is the full name for it, Stefan. Yeah. So
yeah.
We hope to have a full discussion around all the issues concerning AI and machine learning. Please, if you have a question, pop it into the Q&A, and usual rules apply. As long as it's not libelous or asking somebody for inside information on their business, we will ask that question, and we will certainly endeavour to get to as many of them as we can at the end. So what we want to talk about today very much is where are we with AI and machine learning? Where are we going? Where can we go? And what are the challenges and opportunities along the way? So what I'll start, if I may, I'll start with you, Rama. Where are we now with AI and machine learning in foreign exchange markets?
Well, I mean, I think we have seen a lot of deployment of AI and more precisely machine learning techniques for building models for complex data sets that are constantly thrown at market participants with the availability of more electronic data. So the first generation of applications we've seen emerge more or less successfully have been in listed markets where electronic data has been available in a very well-defined standardized format, which is what these algorithms feed on. And these algorithms have been used to construct models, quantitative models for trading, for prediction, for risk management, often in data-intensive environments like intraday trading, where the data flow is really impossible for a human operator to digest and manage in real time. So that's what we've seen successfully emerge in listed markets, like in futures markets. In FX spot markets, this has been more difficult because, as we know, the market is fragmented. There are multiple data sources which have different formats. There's this heterogeneity challenge from the data, but also because there's other data which are relevant for FX markets, macro data, news feeds. So this is what's called in the machine learning language unstructured data. And this has been the second wave of efforts in the machine learning and AI area to tame the information or content of its unstructured data, how to extract information from news feeds and other non-price, non-market indicators. And this is something that we're seeing now, both in FX and in other markets. And then there's a third type of data which exists in large financial institutions and market infrastructures, and that's client data. So every institution has relations with many clients. The clients have certain patterns in their orders, and a lot of effort has gone into this, especially in the banking sector, on how to exploit this client data, for example, for building a recommendation system, kind of like what you see in Netflix and Amazon, but for the sales teams and marketing teams to be able to match clients with products that they would be desiring given their previous patterns of trading. So these recommender systems is what I would say is the third type of effort that we see deployed in financial institutions. So all of these in the FX market, because of the higher complexity of the data sets involved and their unstructured nature, I would say it's still in their infancy because the data is much more complex and heterogeneous than what we see in listed markets. Some of these things have been very successfully implemented in, say, equity markets and in futures markets because the data is easier to access and more organized there. In FX, there is this extra layer of complexity, and I think that's where a tool which can process and integrate this heterogeneity and bring it to a level, first of all, standardize it and format it in a level that is exploitable by algorithms, and bring it to a format that is understandable by a human operator. That's a crucial step that needs to be taken in order for the applications which have been shown to work in other markets to be deployed also in effect. So I would say this is a summary of how I see the situation.
All I can say, Rammer, is I hope it's better at recommending things than my Netflix is, especially when my wife's been on my account. We have totally different tastes. Matt, from your point of view, I mean, is there a threshold then in the FX market that we need to hit, Matt, where to make this data sort of valuable enough?
Well, I think, Rama hit on essentially the crux of the matter, which is that it's this idea that you've got more and greater fragmentation within the markets. And so the challenge is, how do you normalize or harmonize the data? And I think there isn't an institution that we've been into within Mosaic Smart Data where that data has already been cleansed and hygiene checked and is being put to purpose. So it's really, I would say, if you think about the sort of the life cycle of applying machine learning to the organization, the very first place to begin is to get the foundational building blocks into coherence. And when Ram was talking about the fact that so much value lies in the transaction record, a lot of firms seem to think that they need to go external of their own in-house data and buy in more and greater quantities of data when they're not putting the data that they have in-house to use correctly. So it's really much more about the refinement of that data and then the extraction of those insights. I think one of the big challenges, which is really sort of the giant gorilla that sits in the middle of the room, is and it might sound like a slightly counterintuitive point to start with, but it's really, I think it begins with the culture of the firm and the desire for change. Because unless that desire is coming from the top of the house, these sorts of systems, they become essentially vanity projects, and people then don't adopt them if they become free options. So I think the key to it is that once an organization has made the decision that innovation is a core theme for essentially its survival in this new paradigm, which is, what is the world like if you're sitting without any of these sorts of supplementary intelligence across the organization? How do you compete? And so I think that message has to be driven from the top, driving it largely on one initiative, not having competing analytics initiatives in-house, having one initiative, and then making sure that you've got the right people in the organization, you've got the right technology, and then you're executing fast. Those are themes that when we've seen successful implementations, that's typically led by the top of the house, where there is a desire for change, and this desire for change is often very uncomfortable, but it's absolutely necessary. So once you've done all of that, then a case of saying, right, we now need to sift through the data and bring it into coherence. Because once you've got that, whether you're applying it for your performance or your pricing engines, but it's valuable for your risk, it's valuable for surveillance, compliance, reg reporting, it becomes an absolutely essential building block for the organization. But I'm sure the other participants have got some things they'd like to add, but very happy to talk further on the subject because it's one very close to my heart.
Well, in that case, you'll get your chance. John, from your perspective, I mean, obviously you guys have actually sort of been in this space for a couple of years now, to my knowledge, anyway. What's your experience been, and where do you think we are now?
So I don't know where we're at. I mean, across the street, it seems like a lot of market participants are probably doing things they don't want to talk about. We came out early public about it because it was really, really hard, and it took us probably 3 years to get into production. And so at the time we thought if we tell people, at best, maybe they'll catch up in 2 years, and by then the world will move on a little bit. So, we talked about it. If you ask banks, like, oh, do you use linear regression? Like, do you have some very simple models? I guess all the banks do that, and the work's never done. And for us, deep neural nets are like an advanced linear regression. It's a tool that's being used. It's in there. We still work on it. Every week we have a progress report because we're always trying to get to the next version, just like you did with linear regression models. So I think it helps us. It gives us an edge. There's many ways to do it. We just did this way because, we're a lazy lot and we'd rather have the computers do the work than people. And, as an e-trader, I guess that's where we're supposed to be. Hopefully my boss isn't watching. If he is, I do work hard. Not really. The other thing I'll say is, as Rama pointed out, like there's the data, there's the unstructured data, and then there's maybe the Netflix client recommendation. And so we're not all the way through that trajectory. We're still in the data part. Unstructured looks like it'll be coming soon. We expect to have a little bit of an impact, not huge. The other thing I wanted to mention was just the equities thing. Maybe equities is easier because of the type of data and the markets look very similar compared to FX. But actually equities is way harder. I don't know what those guys are doing, but they would have a challenge. If you just think about the amount of data and the size of your matrices, basically for AI or ML to work, you're going to do a lot of multiplications and additions, very basically. And at FX, the market's still slow enough on purpose so that you can do those calculations. And in equities, where you can't really spare a microsecond or two, and you're talking about hundreds of nanos, it doesn't give you time to add many numbers. And so I think FX is probably the sweet spot.
So is that then actually like the offsetting challenge there? The fact that on one hand, you can say, well, in equity markets, the data is uniform and totally structured. Everybody sees the same data, but you don't have the time to process and to create that difference. So is that kind of the trade-off that people have to look at?
Maybe a little different. So, what problem do you solve? You generally try to solve the easiest problem, and it's a lot easier to forecast 1 second than 1 minute or 1 hour. And so in FX, we focus for the short, tens of seconds. And in equities, where you have to get your calcs out very quickly, I don't know, I'm not an equity guy, but I guess what they have to do is the harder problem and focus further out, where, maybe they have a 2-minute signal. And so, who cares about milliseconds even? You can do a very difficult calculation. But, I'm an FX guy, so I actually don't know what they're doing. But, usually most people in the E space, they're lazy and they try to find the easy problem and solve that first. So that'd be my guess.
And I have a long and proud history of not caring about what anybody in the equity space does. So I'm with you on that one. Stefan Maurer, so from your point of view then, where do you see AI and machine learning now in your organization and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, I think it's I will agree and disagree with what have been said before. In one way, yes, AI has been touched and focused on for probably in our organization for between 5 to 7 years, because we are probably a big retail banks with a lot of transaction, etc., with smaller financial market activities. So there is some knowledge in AI and machine learning within the organization, and I think it's the same for quite a lot of organizations similar to us. But when we focus back to FX and how AI and machine learning is used in FX, I think there is more a marketing speech toward clients, to be honest, than a full reality. And this is for a few reasons, I think. One is, as Matt was saying, it's cultural. A lot of the setup of the desks that we've been doing for the last 20 years was to have algo trader quants on the desk who was more computer engineers and data scientists, right? So you have that generation who just develop algos from a compute power, latency driven to try to go faster on mathematical model, less having the skill set of the data scientists. The second thing I think is more, we focused more on the algorithmic trading, how to hedge, how to manage risk, how to price, but we didn't focus too much on the huge value of AI could bring towards the clients. How can I improve my service to the clients? And this is, for me, the big difference between FX, which is an OTC-driven market, versus equities, is we are facing the client most of the time. We know who we are servicing. And so to be able to use AI in this domain will bring a lot of advantage. But, when I talk privately to peers, I don't see many people doing that yet. So maybe that's the opportunity, but it's not the reality yet.
Okay. Stefan A., Can't believe we've got two Stephans on the panel. Stefan, so the other Stefan raised an interesting point there about the customer. Where is this being deployed, and how is it changing the way you're looking at your role with customers?
I think it is a game changer. It's going to disrupt the way that salespeople are starting to interact with clients. Everybody at the moment is talking about client experience, client engagement. A lot of industry are talking about it. I still think that the financial industry is not talking enough about it, and FX probably not enough. And what is the situation now? You've got a salespeople interacting with his client. He's got a portfolio about 20 to 30 clients. He's got 5 or 6 clients that are extremely close because he's his mate, he's very close to him. He's got another 5 to 10 clients where he's got an okay relationship, and he's got a bench of 10 to 15 clients where he's got a quite poor relationship. So all the point, and I think that the disruption that is triggered, by artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's how can you change, this kind of Pareto rules, these 80-20 rules, where you focus on this small amount of number of clients and you totally neglect the other one. How can you try to be much more impactful, much more, engaged with all your clients? And that's all for me, the prediction angle that will be providing by AI and machine learning is that to give some information that, the sales was not aware about, but what the client, is going to do and engage with the client. So to stop talking to a client about dollar yen when the client is actively trading cable, in the market. To start talking to some things the client care. So to build up relationship, to strengthen relationship, with his client and to be much more impactful. And that's what we want, ultimately. We want better to serve our clients. But at the moment, I don't think we're in the right direction. We are still way, way too manual. And I agree with Stefan. We are in the starting point, on this process. And it's quite disrupting to use a new methodology to make, the sales much smarter. Because he will know through AI/ML what the client is going to do. He will match that, and Professor Ramekant mentioned that about, the matching client and product. He will match that with product, with content, and be much more impactful. And I think that's what is going to happen even more, going forward.
There is going to be a challenge there, though, isn't there? Because obviously clients are very aware of how much their service providers know about their business. And, there are, I wouldn't say they're necessarily genuine concerns or what I would say realistic concerns, but about people using information. So do we have to be careful, or do we have to sort of bring the clients along with us to say, yes, we are going to be able to service you better, and it will mean that we have a slightly more information about what you do, but the net result will be, we have to prove the net result is better for the client. Is that going to be a challenge we're going to face?
We'll have to be extremely transparent with the client. But we'll have to be clear that the point of what we're doing is to better serve our clients. But we'll have to be transparent. We'll have to show, the signal. We'll have, to talk about it and to make sure that the client totally integrates, in this new mindset somewhere. And it will be a mix, between client relationship, between signal-based, algos. And we'll have, to mention that. But at the end of the day, if you talk, if you provide some valuable information to a client, I think client will be happy about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's, as far back as I can remember, there's been this paranoia on both sides. The client thinks the bank's reading them. The bank thinks the client's trading away. So it's a question of managing that relationship around it. And we've got our first comment already, actually, on the Q&A, which basically says, and is hashtagged, very, very up to date there. Our jobs will change, which I think is a good way to move on here. So Rama, how do you think AI and machine learning will change the day-to-day life of someone in the trading business?
Well, so I think this discussion that we just heard about the client data and how to exploit client data to change the relationship with clients is very relevant. This may not have been deployed yet extensively in the FX area, but I've seen recommender systems, as we discussed, with analogy Netflix, I think is a good analogy, deployed in many large financial institutions for exploiting the data they have on their institutional clients. I've seen that deployed in several banks on structured products. And so the way it works is, so ultimately a machine learning algorithm is about finding structure in data. So here the data is both successful and unsuccessful attempts at bringing a product to the attention of clients. So we often think of, when you look at sales, the performance of sales teams, you often focus on the top salespeople and their traits, but there is also information for such algorithms in the unsuccessful attempts. So if a client refuses repeatedly a certain type of deal, well, that's also very interesting information. So it means that, so currently this information is available. It's in the brains of the salespeople. It's in their memories, and they have some record somewhere. But if an institution is able to pool this information together from all the salespeople on all successful and unsuccessful attempts to market a product to a client, this becomes a very interesting database, because it's going to, an algorithm which is capable of finding structure in this data is going to actually exploit the experiences of the top salesmen and the worst ones, and together. And the goal of these recommender systems is ultimately to, these are what are called classifier systems, is to match certain types of products with certain clients. So when a new opportunity comes, where, for example, there's a new request for quote, then instead of each salesperson trying to match this product with the clients they know because they have a personal relationship, they're going to get a recommendation from the system saying these clients are probably interested in this product, so they focus on that, and this just increases the efficiency of the whole process. And in this recommendation, in a well-trained recommender system, you have the experience not only of this specific salesperson, but also it is summarizing the experience of all the other salespersons, which in an ordinary context may not have shared this information with this specific salesperson. So there's a pooling of information here, and there's an increase in efficiency which can be gained from the implementation of such a recommender system. So I've seen this successfully deployed in some institutions in cases where the database is available. But this example shows that, and this is a general feature in these learning algorithms, in machine learning algorithms, the first step is having clean formatted data for the learning algorithm to feed on. If you don't have that, then you cannot even start this discussion. And of course, some of these algorithms have been around for decades. So John alluded to deep neural networks. That's the most impressive thing we have now. We hear about deep learning and so on. But actually, deep learning algorithms have been around since the 80s, late 80s. So why is it that they have not been more prominent in financial applications and other applications? Well, there are two answers. One is that they are very data hungry. They need to really feed on large amount of data to be effective, to find patterns. And then second, they require computational power, and this computational power really emerged in the last decade. So the computational power is there, that's there, but the data is not always there, especially in applications like the one we described, because you can have many clients, but you didn't store all the transactions, or every sales team has their own data. They don't want to share it with the other teams because there are the commercial issues involved. So this is often the obstacle to this kind of application. But ultimately, in a large financial institution, the management will end up by understanding that it is in their interest as an institution to construct pooled data sets, and there are protocols in which sales teams can contribute to such pooled data sets without revealing information to other sales teams if there is an issue of competition involved. So there are protocols to share this data without compromising certain confidentiality. So once this has been overcome, and once these data sets are standardized, then techniques exist, understood techniques can be deployed, and we can go forward. So I think this first stage should not be underestimated. Putting in place these data sets in a standardized exploitable format is a formidable challenge. And this can only be done in a top-down manner, because people don't just give up their data unless they have to. I mean, this is a rule. Data is, in a financial institution, data nowadays means some power or influence. I mean, there is value in data. People know that. So the constitution of these data sets, I think, is the first hurdle. And in FX, because of the fragmented nature of the market, OTC nature, the fact that some of it is going to be in voice, some of it is going to be in numerical format, some of it is going to be in some sales teams' files, this heterogeneity is, I think, a big challenge.
Yeah. Matt, I'm going to come back to you in a second, if I may, on the clean data and getting this data together. But one of the reasons why I love our audience so much is they throw the hand grenades nice and early. So I guess I'll ask Stefan M this one from the audience. Do you foresee, and Ramel was talking there about the sales desk. The question is, do you foresee in the near future the extinction of client-facing FX sales desks at banks, which we've seen to some extent on with some desks that we're talking to small and medium enterprises? Fire at will, Stefan.
Yes, so no, I don't see the death of the sales, and I've been in this industry for probably 30 years now, looking at FX, and the same question came almost every year to say, is EFX sales are going to replace the voice sales? Is the algo going to replace the EFX sales, and etc. It's still in FX, it's still a very relationship-based business that we are running, and probably the role of the FX salesperson will change, as Stefan Alex was alluding, and people have to be much data focused and data centric to be able to improve the capacities they have, to improve the relationships they have with their clients. But the sales will continue to have a very important role to play in that.
Right. So Matt, from your point of view, just go back to Ramel's point there around the data. How can, or can even data be a differentiator in an AI and machine learning world?
Well, I think, data is the differentiator, because I think if you think about people saying, well, if everybody's using machine learning and AI, how is that a differentiator? And the differentiation is, of course, the transactions to start with that the institution is seeing. And of course, every institution has a completely unique fingerprint. And so when you start then applying the modeling techniques, again, there's an infinite number of ways of applying techniques to the data. So again, you're going to get completely different outcomes. I think the key, and really what Rama is alluding to, is this idea that, and one of the audience asked the question, which is how does the role evolve for the salesperson? I think it's really about efficiency, and it's about relevance. The point of it is that, can you anticipate the needs of a client? Because if you imagine, we've moved away from essentially a proprietary trading world. So pre-Dodd-Frank and all of the reg changes that we've had to go through with MiFID, it's now really about putting the client at the center of everything we do. If you think about a traditional business intelligence framework, which is essentially a deterministic framework, you're looking at metrics that the business is deriving, but that doesn't give you any power to anticipate. And so there's two sides to anticipation. One is, how do you defend the business that you've got? Because we all know it's much more expensive to acquire a new client than it is to maintain a relationship. And I think to the point that Stefan Alex made, which was that, how do you mine the long tail of opportunity? Because that Pareto rule is really about driving efficiency out of the relationships you've got. And so when you think about that, then it's saying, okay, well, we've got this institutional value. How do we become incredibly relevant in terms of a personalized way for our client? That can we meet their needs as they become relevant for the client? So do we know perhaps that the client might be active at the end of the month and is going to be active in a particular cross? And can we make sure that we've got inventory available that we can give them an incredibly aggressive price? Now that sort of thinking is really required across all markets, not just FX. If you think about it, all of the different various markets, whether they're rates or credit markets, EM, everybody has that need to be relevant. One of the features that we've seen is that typically, and certainly from my own experience, is that oftentimes sales teams will wait for the phone to ring. When you have prompts to action, one of the benefits of it is that people now make outgoing calls, and those outgoing calls lead to longer conversations. And those longer conversations are because we have unique insights that we're now imparting on our clients. Of course, information is king. I think that's exactly the point that all of the panelists are talking about. And what that ultimately leads to is more business. And that's actually, we've heard that directly from clients of ours that are leveraging this technique and the software.
Mm. Another comment from the audience here, actually. This is fantastic. I love it when I don't have to ask any questions. But Matt, so I'll keep you there while you're there, Matt. I mean, it says even with larger amounts of data, higher computational power and standardized data sets, I still see the problem of high noise, low signal to noise ratio, at least when, you know, using AI and ML for FX trading. How do we solve for that?
Well, look, I mean, the high signal to noise ratio is one that I think all markets suffer, which is, you know, it's basically putting the right models for the right data sets and the size of the data, because often one of the things that I get asked, which is, how do you apply a neural net to a small data set? Well, frankly, you don't. It's making sure that you are customizing the model for that environment and that data set, which then leads to the fact that, you know, are the models being tuned for a new regime, and are you able to see how those regime changes are evolving? I think, you know, one of the key features around essentially that signal to noise is this idea of really inter-industry collaboration and R&D. So we were privileged to do an R&D book of work with the European Space Agency. It kicked off in 2018, and really what it was this idea that, you know, the ESA sits with an enormous amount of IP, and what they were looking to do is to bring what they considered to be space assets to the financial markets, and identifying fintechs that they thought some of the algos that they use in essentially anomaly detection on satellite instrumentation measurement, could those be applied into financial data sets? So what we did is we did this R&D with them, and with essentially the number one objective of reducing false positives in the data. So we've now applied those algos into production today, and that is exactly the benefit, which is that reduction of signal to noise. So that are the signals that you're giving to people relevant at the moment in time. The other benefit, of course, is on a recommender system, which is that once you've got the participants interacting with the output of the models, you can start to recalibrate the models in real time. So as you are actually interacting with a suggestion, and you're starting to say, yes, give me more of that, or give me less of that, the recommender engine is starting to learn from you and learn your patterns. And then you start getting to much more of a hyper-personalized experience for the user group. So I'd say, you know, I mean, perhaps Rama would like to just talk a little about signal to noise, or even John.
Yeah, I mean, actually, John, could I come to you with it as well, to kind of get what your experience has been over the last year with that? Because, you know, and maybe feed in some of the some commentary around how the market actually, or how AI and machine learning performed during the mayhem of, you know, March and April last year.
Super. Just one thing about AI. So there's two things actually. There's one which is, we're probably talking about two different applications. My application is the flow products, the very simple, high data set, terrible signal to noise, but not as bad as the more structured products. Structured products recommender systems, I'm not familiar with that, and we might be doing that in the bank, but I'm on the flow side. So specifically talking about, you know, how to pull signal out of FX spot data. The other thing is, you know, AI is cool. It's kind of a fun project. It's stimulating intellectually. None of those reasons are the reasons we did it. The reason we did it on the flow side is we'd go to clients and tell them about our programs and all the stuff we're changing, and they would listen politely and say, can you tighten your spreads? Could you show me an axe? And so, you know what, we didn't come in with like this AI hammer and just be like, where's some data, I'm going to smash it. We came out from client meetings going, you know, we should invest in better pricing. We should do that. And there's different ways. We chose AI instead of low latency or something else, and it turned out to be fruitful. But I would say in general, you know, listen to your clients, whether internal or external, and find out what they want and build that out. But okay, now I'll get to your question. Apologies for the roundabout answer. But one of the things that we were concerned about when we first built it was, the machine goes crazy. I think we've all seen enough movies where, HAL 9001 takes over, or et cetera. And turns out our AI isn't smart enough to impersonate even myself yet. So, you still want to have controls around it. In volatile markets, in the New York to Singapore handover, there's plenty of time, start of week. And so what we did is we put lots of controls about how much the AI can take control, and it's limited. And so you might go, oh, during the palladium blow up, or the gold blow up, or the turkey blow up, or the sterling crashes, you must have had problems. No, actually, it was the opposite. Because of the limitations, we didn't have it operating at full capacity as a function of volatility or spreads. And so I would say our biggest impact of the AI is when markets are kind of calm and very competitive, and then we can move our price around within that limited range. And then once, I don't know, dollar turkey blows out in spread terms, the AI has a much smaller impact, and it turns out to be other things.
Steph and Alex, I mean, from your point of view, then, how do you think that AI and machine learning can help you in more volatile conditions?
It does create signals, and that's what you want, because I mean, you want to get signal. You want to know who is doing what, who is doing when. So I mean, when we are talking about client anomaly detections, about new client activity, about client clipping behavior, level clustering signals. So that's all this kind of information that as a sales you want to get, because you want to be impactful in front of your client. You want to make sure to have the right, information and the right engagement with your client. And you need this information. It's extremely, when you don't have access to all this kind of technology, it's very difficult to know. Your client is extremely busy to handle, his day-to-day business, probably to do even more, because I mean, last year you will talk to any FX sales, desk in the planet, that probably one of the busiest, year they ever had, in the last 10 years, probably. So, and because there were a lot of client activity, but you want to know what exactly, who is doing what, and when are they doing that? So that's all the value, about all, the signals to feed, the sales with information, to allow, the sales to pick up this phone and to make sure, in a stress environment, because it's difficult when your client in stress, to act and to trade, you want to make sure that you are as impactful as possible. So here, during this crisis, AI and machine learning has been extremely, and will be even more, because I still think there is a long way to go going forward, but will be extremely interesting for us. So, yeah.
I would like to add something about this signal to noise ratio and how these models are deployed. So I think the term artificial intelligence sounds a bit ambitious because it suggests the robots running a trading desk and so on. I don't think we're quite talking about that. I would say that it's really about finding structure in data, and these machine learning algorithms are just about finding structure in data. Then the final output will be a model which can be used by human analysts. So here I'm going to give two examples. One is you have a very complex data set, and you want to learn whether there are interesting patterns in the data that can be exploited for risk prediction and so on. So what these algorithms do is they explore the data and show you if there are interesting patterns. And previously this was done with linear models, with linear regression. Now these algorithms can find nonlinear relations. So they look at a broader set of possible relations. And then once they find these relations, it leads to a model which can be used by quants or analysts to then build a risk model for the trading desk. So the final step will be still a model, which is in the usual format, and it's usable by analysts for doing what they usually do. So it's not, again, a robot running the trading desk and so on. So the second case is, we talked about these recommender systems. Here, we're talking about using a machine learning layer to build a decision aid tool, but the decision will be ultimately again taken by a human salesperson. So the human salesperson, instead of looking at their Rolodex and looking at the information they usually have, they will still have the Rolodex, but they will also have an algorithm giving them, flagging up some client names and say, okay, you should probably call these people in this order. So, but again, it's a decision aid tool. The human salesperson can use this in conjunction with other qualitative elements they had earlier, and they will combine them to make a decision, which is ultimately their decision. So we're not looking at fully automated things, and I think that's important to realize. So we're not, so it's about really finding patterns in data which may be useful, and then at the end, the decision can still be made by a voice trader or a salesperson. Now, one question that I saw, and I'm going to end with this in the chat room, is, we see a lot of discussion about the way banks will be harnessing big data and AI to serve their clients, and will we see the clients engage with similar tools, or just take what the banks provide? I think that's a very good question, because on the bank side, we see, banks have traditionally had sizable quant teams, quantitative research. So many large banks have large teams dedicated to data science. Now they're looking at these tools actively and seeing where they can be deployed. This may not be the case on the buy side, because some funds may not have the luxury to have such large teams dedicated to this. So I think that's where it's important to have software tools available which can actually bring the advances in AI and machine learning to users who are not quants, because we had this situation many years ago when statistical tools was trying to be deployed on a large scale in financial markets. In the beginning, you had to be a computer scientist or statistician to use these things. Then we had, commercial software, and then anybody could, click, and you had spreadsheet commands. You didn't need to be an expert to implement these. So I think we are at this stage where it's very, the availability of easy to use software, the commercial software tools, which harness the power of these machine learning algorithms and allow you to explore data sets without being an expert data scientist. These can be very useful. And one key thing here, it may not seem so obvious, but is the interface, is the user interface. There are many packages or tools available out there, some of them even open source, free, but you really need to be the data scientist to even start using them on and deploying them on your data. And whereas most users in the financial markets, think about the salespersons we're talking about, they're not going to be data scientists. But we, as we've tried to argue here, these tools can be useful for them. So the interface needs to be a non-technical interface where the user can, actually speak in English or whatever language they speak, and ask for something and get a response in the same language they speak. And that's something that has been developed, we've seen emerge in the last few years. It's the use of natural language processing and natural language generation. So this is the ability for machines to interact with a human user in their own language, in their non-natural language, rather than the user interacting with them in Python. And that is key for expanding the base of users to a large range of users in financial institutions rather than only quant desks. And I think Matt can speak to that. And tell us.
Can I jump in real fast? I just want to correct something. Sorry, not correct, provide a different viewpoint. So again, I think Rama's talking about probably the non-flow products. On the flow products, if I could do it in a robot voice, I would, but I can't. We have a robot that runs it. It's not with a human involvement. My job is pretty good at CS because the machine does the work. And the trading and the update speeds, all that's too fast to be human involvement. So literally, we have an RNN in the core of our pricing engine that's run with a human framework, human control framework. So we specify some controls, but the robot does all the heavy lifting. And what we do is strategy and think about things more long term. The other thing I'd say is when I was first trying to get involved in this whole AI thing, I thought, well, you know, how hard can it be? And I started trying to do stuff without much education. And, you know, there's an infinite number, not infinite, there's a very large number of models, and there's an infinite number of parameters for those models. And basically, I spent, not a Credit Suisse time, you know, on my weekends, I spent a lot of time goofing off trying to learn this. And if you've ever done like curve fitting or linear regression, if you don't know what you're doing, you can spend lots of time but get very little progress. And I had to take courses to actually understand it. And I still don't understand it, but at least I appreciate how difficult it is. And so I would say if anyone's thinking like, oh yeah, you know, I'd love to like random forest up some data and get a prediction out, I would say do some online learning and understand the techniques, and then you'll appreciate how hard it is. Maybe you'll even get something out of it. But if you just try like I did, which is random, you won't get much done.
So you've got to be structured in your approach to learning about AI. There's a lot of structure. Stefan Maurer, I mean, something that came up a couple of times there, which I thought was quite interesting, is, you know, we're putting the information in the hands of the salesperson, you know, to move away from the trading side. Do we also need to make sure that we put in place parameters to make sure that, you know, for instance, you know, if you have something that's a piece of information that should be broadcast to all clients, you've got to make sure that comes up as well. I mean, is that something you guys worry about, ING?
Yes, and there is a different way to look at it. So from there is some focus in the industry in the world of algorithmic trading, and mainly this renewed focus is because of AI. So we'll take from the outside and going back to the inside of our organization, but you had in Europe at least a consultation by ESMA on algorithmic trading as part of the MiFID review in a few months ago, because they think that algorithms are getting more and more important in our financial market, and they want to make sure it's well controlled, and you have all the appropriate level of control in the bank. You also have in FX the Global FX Code 3-year review, where there is a dedicated section on algo trading and TCA, and this is new for the code of conduct, and was designed mainly because of AI, mainly because we see that this world will continue to evolve rapidly, and so the industry and the global code should evolve as well. And then you have the organization level. So at ING, we have an ethic board to make sure that we cannot just take client information and do everything with it. And we had few examples where you know, AI can give the wrong signal or the unethical output. So it was well discussed in the press. So that's why those ethical boards are very useful. So this is a group level, and then we make sure we have defined controls in place each time we put a new algorithm to production in terms of testing, supervision, validation by different teams within the organization who can have veto rights to refuse if they feel there is risk. Yeah. So I think from a control point of view, the industry is extremely careful around that, and that's probably not where the challenge, the main challenge will be. I think the challenge, as we discussed in the beginning, are more on the cultural side. How do people move away from a fear that AI will take away their job and move closer to make data-driven decision?
I don't think there's been a technology ever released that hasn't made people fear for their job. It's just a question of just another hurdle we have to get over, isn't it?
Yes.
Matt, I mean, I'm aware we've got just a fraction over 10 minutes left. So I want to kind of really look at some of the sort of the nitty gritty of the issue, and also maybe where we're going. Someone's put on the Q&A there, you know, AI systems, which frameworks, cloud or in-house. Maybe Matt, you could talk to that, but also could you do that within the framework of, you know, what are the keys to building a good regime that could work across different trading styles?
Well, you know, I think the problem is there's no silver bullet that encompasses all various needs for the application of machine learning. I think just to reference a couple of things, which is, you know, Professor Kant was talking about the idea that essentially to democratize understanding across an organization, you need to make sure that you aren't building in complexity for every single individual. What you're trying to do is to get the value of the outputs being distributed and the application of it to each and every role, whether it's sales, whether it's trading, management, making sure that the data that you've got in-house can be extracted for value creation. So I think, the way where it's going is this idea that we often get asked, which is, so is your architecture closed, or can we contribute our own models into the platform, and how do we see the organization and essentially get to market really fast? Because the challenge in this environment today is speed to market. It's, can you build the tools yourself? Do you have the risk appetite, and do you have the budget to do it? And do you have the in-house capability? Now, if you don't, then you really are going to have to go outside and find a specialist organization that understands all the way from how do you take the raw data and bring it into coherence, all the way through to how do you build comprehension in the data and allow the user to interact in a very consumer world rather than an enterprise world way. And I think that that's really the kind of holy grail of where we're seeing the direction of travel, which is making sure that as you deliver products, if you imagine, the inheritors of the organization are the millennials and essentially the generations that are going to come after them, and they are seriously not going to be tolerant for the kind of antiquated enterprise solutions that have come in the past. But I think then the key is also to say, but can you provide product within the organization where the IP that the organization wants to keep in-house can be retained in-house and stays absolutely private? So it's not a case of you either build it yourself, or you go and get some specialist who's going to go and keep a closed system. It's really about the marriage of both. And I think that that's where the future resides, which is, if you think about this idea of creating, really the efficiency and the relevance for every single role in the organization, then you have to have a super flexible architecture. And that architecture needs to be able to evolve as new roles come out and are required. And I think the key here is really to put people's minds at rest, which is that in no way, I mean, certainly for an organization like ours, which is a data analytics company, it's really about empowerment. It's not about disruption. It's about how do you take what you already have, refine it in a far, far more atomic and granular way. And then, as Professor Kant was talking about, saying, what are the nonlinear patterns in this data? And then can we serve those to you, which are going to make you far more relevant for the customers that you have. So if you think about it that way, then it's something to be embraced rather than feared. And I think, one of the things I would say is when I go and talk to people across the industry, it's very interesting to see this sort of the various opinions where some people look at the application of these techniques as absolutely abhorrent and so fearful. And others just can't wait to get their hands on it and want to apply it and see the benefits of it. And I think really as a group and having a webinar like this, it's really to explain that this isn't something to be feared. This is something to be embraced. Because the challenge, I think, as we come into the latter part of this decade is going to be, if you don't have these kinds of insights, how relevant are you going to be? Because if you imagine, where are we going to see more and more application of essentially machine learning? It's at the trading desk, and you're going to see more and more spread compression. The more spread compression you get, the more participants you're going to get, and the more participants you get so much more data. Now, a human being can never go into that realm of trying to process the data themselves. So the machine has to do the work for you, and to be able to sift through and create essentially that signal to noise ratio where it's as low as possible. In other words, you are being as relevant with as few false positives as you can be. I think that those are the organizations that will see themselves through into the next decade.
I think John just gulped heavily there when he went to spread compression more. I mean, Steph and Alex, from your point of view, I mean, so looking ahead, I think some of the points Matt was making there was quite important, weren't they? It's about actually being able to deliver the right data to the right client.
It is, and I think it's a massive future for business going forward. And Matt, we've been talking a lot about pre-trade, but we should talk also about post-trade. Is that there is clients are extremely price sensitive. That's something that is very important, the quality of the execution. And that's also something we need, to be mindful and need to work, a lot going forward. And again, that's where technology and AI can be extremely helpful for us going forward. Let's go back to basic. What is a good trade? A good trade is a trade where the client is happy first. The trader is happy because if the trader is losing money on the trade, you will have a trouble. And where you as a sales in the middle, you're happy. And how can you find, the right, balance on that? How can we, and that's where all this post-trade analytics is extremely interesting for us to assess and to be able to see how we can properly monetize a trade, how trading can properly price a trade, because we are using also, AI for in-skewing, for out-skewing pricing as well. So what should be the right price? When we're talking about a voice trader as well, what should be the right price? You should input, to a specific transaction. And what, also AI can be very, very interesting, for us is to say that considering this market environment, this type of client, this profiling of client, and this specific, price, we should, have a very specific spread. Sorry, I'm not very clear. Very specific spread, applied. And I think, that if you don't have the technology to help you on that, you won't be able, to be impactful, because you can have the best service as possible pre-trade, and with a client. If you don't have, the great technology to help you post-trade, you will not be impactful properly. So, and I think that's where the future of our business is, for us to better understand the client before, to be able to provide some information the client doesn't know. Tell me something I don't know, and that's something that the client wants to know. You want to say something different to the client, and when the client wants and trusts you, to price, you want to show the right price. And all of that, and I think all this comes from pre-trade, KYC, up to post-trade, in kind of pricing adequation. It's something where, AI machine learning will be a game changer. So I think there is a lot, of opportunity going forward, for this technology in my world.
We've got a couple of minutes left. So what I'm going to do, we're going to go for a free-for-all for all the panel here. So literally just shout out if you're an answer. So I want to quickly, if I can, run through a couple of points and some questions on the Q&A. First one up here, or it was actually the last one. Are deep neural nets the most useful approach for FX, or are other aspects of AI considered potentially fruitful? Also, is it possible for buy-side clients to use AI on their end to disrupt the current approach, or do they lack the data required? We'll probably split that one up. Does someone want to talk about, are deep neural nets the most useful approach for FX, or are other aspects fruitful?
Yeah, I would say for some problems, yes, they're very useful, and for other problems, they're completely useless. So it depends on your problem statement. Sorry.
Anybody else want to chip in on that one before we move on? Because there's a couple here on the buy side, actually. Someone made the comment that, the challenge for the buy side is a lack of standardization of the trade information they consume from the sell side. So do we need to look at that as something as an industry thing, or have I just given Matt the best opportunity to sell ever?
No, but I think, the thing is that just on both sides of the fence, really, everybody suffers from the same challenge, which is that data normalization. I mean, the buy side are pushing their trades down every channel. Of course, they need to be able to understand in a single repository all of the relevant dealer performance and understand, for a particular market environment where they should be pushing their flow, how they should break it down for the amount of market impact that they're prepared to be, tolerant of. I think, it's essentially just the orthogonal view of what the sell side is interested in understanding. It's saying, I want to understand my market share, I want to understand my profitability. On the buy side, I want to understand my dealer performance, and I want to look at my transaction quality analysis, not necessarily the cost analysis anymore. It's the quality of that analysis in terms of, when I push orders down to the market, am I getting the kind of results in terms of impact that I can, of course, go back to my fund sponsors and defend. I think that's one of the key features. But the other thing I would just mention, which is, it's very easy to talk about this and this, essentially trying to get to advanced analytics in the organization. The challenge, of course, is really speed to market, and I think this is one of the key, I would say, takeaways today, which is that once you've made the decision to get it, you've got to get it quickly because your competitors are going straight for it now. And I think, finding organizations that can deliver quickly in cloud environments, making sure that, it doesn't have to be all on-site deployed, very heavy lifting with very heavy resource utilization. It can be lightweight, it can be quick, and you can get results out of the box in a matter of months rather than, multiple year projects.
Yeah. The two Stefans, I found a way around the problem. Two Stefans. Do you think, a few questions come up there, do we think clients will actually look to take this sort of these techniques and this technology on directly, or will they continue to rely upon their banks primarily to provide the information?
I can start. I think it's going to take time. So as we say in the beginning, I think there's still a lot of work to do on the bank side to adopt AI and to improve the relationships they can do, the service they can do using AI to their clients. And probably the banks are a bit more equipped in terms of digitalization, transformation, budget to do those kind of things. And the buy side is a little bit more passive. But they will come next, right? And this is what we saw in the last 10 years when there is new activity. Algorithmic trading was mainly on the sell side and then moved to the buy side, etc. So the opportunity for the buy side is probably even bigger because they can get data from every liquidity provider they want or they are mapped to. So they can get quite a lot amount of data. And if they innovate properly, they don't have to build everything in-house. Right? They can partner, as Matt was saying, to be able to move quickly. You can look around to say which are the fintech company who are interested in looking at that subject, or we can work with us towards that. So it's not too much a budget issue anymore. It's more a mindset issue to say, like, do I think it's important enough for me to put it on my roadmap? And if it's important, who are the best partner I can find to be able to do it?
Stefan, anything to add?
Yeah, difficult to add anything more to what you said, Stefan. But when you see the quality of the information sometimes that you provide to your client, you see no reason why the client should not use on their own benefit. But I agree, it will take some time. There is some work that is done in kind of robo-advisory, risk management, angle that could be extremely interesting, for clients to better assess their own strategy of trading, their own strategy, of even corporate risk management, analytics. So I think ultimately to use a more quantitative way to assess the performance, and the risk management, that they have, it makes a lot of sense to me. But again, I think it will take a lot of times before going to that route.
Yeah. Okay, we're slightly over, but we'll need to get a couple more out just very quickly. So Rama, so what does the next evolution in AI and machine learning look like to you? Someone mentioned to me the other day, there's a lot of interest in hybrid modeling. Are we, is this sort of direction FX markets are likely to go in?
I think so we talked a lot about data and standardization. So one option, one way to take this discussion is just to say, well, we need to wait for a gigantic standardized data set to emerge, and then we deploy algorithms on it. I don't think that's going to happen. So what we're seeing now is something different, which is the emergence of algorithms which are able to handle heterogeneous unstructured data. And that's more interesting, obviously, because that's how real-time data looks like, raw data looks like. So, so this can come in different forms. So you can have, so for example, one of the things which we see in different markets, not just in FX, is people trying to use natural language processing to process data such as news feeds, macro data, even central bank announcements. You have a speech of a central banker, all of a sudden the markets move. Can you find keywords, process that in real time? So this, I've seen that actually this specific case. So this is something that I think is emerging. It's not something that is fully performant now. People are looking at this, but it's hard to get a signal from a text or news feeds as easily as you get signals from the numerical data with statistical analysis. But this is definitely a direction in which people are moving. There's also non-classical sources of information, non-market, like for example, social media in some cases, Twitter or whatever. So how can this information, is there information there? Can it be used? Can it be harnessed? And can it be integrated? Because ultimately this is what you want. Can it be integrated in a unified framework where you can mix market signals with outputs of sentiment analysis from Twitter or from central bank or news feeds? This is ultimately a system that you would like to have. So integrating different sources and then having them enter as inputs into an algorithm which ultimately does what you want, sales or trading or risk management. So I think this this heterogeneity is the challenge in this area, in the area, both in FX and in other markets. And that's different from some of the impressive advances we've seen in AI in other fields where it's fairly homogeneous. So you see impressive applications where you train a neural network to recognize pictures, but all the pictures are in the same format. So ultimately, compared to the mess we are facing in the data in finance, it's simple because the entry is 1 million pixels, but they're always in the same format. So here, you need to also, the other thing is not just the heterogeneity of formats, but the fact that data arrives at different frequencies. So we have intraday data coming at a millisecond frequency, but then you have macro data, and then you have news feeds. Okay, so you need to treat these different frequencies and then integrate them into a decision aid tool, which may function at still a different frequency, the user's frequency. So this heterogeneity in frequency and formats, I think, is the big challenge. And that's not something that is being dealt with in other applications outside finance because they don't really have to deal with that. Like Amazon and Netflix, they have a very clean standardized data set because they make their own data set. They know they are constantly generating their own data set, so it's easy for them to reformat it. Here, you don't master the inputs. The inputs are what you get. And we're constantly opening to more and more inputs because more and more things are available in electronic format. So what we need is really an open system which can handle inputs in more flexible formats, yet extract structure from them. I think that's the big challenge I see in the market application.
Yeah. Thank you. We've run over time, so we do need to close it out. I just got to ask one question to John. I mean, we've been through a stage he's already looking nervous. I can't think why. We've already been through the stage in FX markets where it was all about latency and about speed. Now, obviously, AI and machine learning will speed up decision making and speed up, the transmission of data to, as Stefan, Alex referred to the people in the front line on the sales desk. Is the future battleground then for foreign exchange market participants likely to be computing power rather than speed?
No. So I disagree. We almost went down the path of equities to lowest latency possible, and we stopped. Yeah. That was when the market introduced randomization and slowed things down. And so now the liquidity providers are basically going to their strength. And so we're a data organization, so we're going to AI. Somebody who's low latency infrastructure will go that way. Somebody who has a massive franchise and doesn't need a tech spend will go that way. And so what I think will happen is all the liquidity providers, banks and non-banks, will just play to their strengths, and it'll be clients who decide who's the winner. And so and then you get more value for AI, then that will become the future. And I'll be lucky enough to be on the seat. And if it turns out to be a latency play, then I'll be pinging my networks for a job. And if it's a big franchise, then it's a different one. But we're all trying to tighten spreads. So I do gulp when we say spread compression, but it's a good gulp. It's like, I'm ready for it. And we're all trying to figure out how to do that best for our clients.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that very quickly. I think the opportunity now is that we focus so much in the last 10 years on spot FX automation. With AI, you can focus on all the other products, right? So how much innovation would you made in the FX swaps, in the FX option business? Now this is a time we can start to innovate in those products as well. So yeah, quite interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm afraid we do have to close it there. We've just 10 minutes over, which is pretty good for me a lot of the time, I have to say. Thank you very much to our panelists. I'd like to thank Mosaic Smart Data for sponsoring and doing so much of the work behind the scenes to get this very interesting webinar going. It's left me with a lot more questions. And I'd like to thank the audience for being very, very full participants and making my job a whole deal easier. So thank you very much. And hopefully we'll be back again soon with another interesting hour and a bit for you. Thanks very much for watching.
There you go.
Thank you indeed.
Thanks, guys.